Well, good morning. If I have not had the opportunity to meet you yet, my name is Brian, and I am one of the leading pastors here at Five Rivers Church, and I just hope I'm one of many people who have said to you today, we are glad that you are here. If you are a guest with us or you haven't been here with us for a little bit, we're in the middle of our Christmas series, Help Me, I'm Feeling, which is something we borrowed from a line of the Dr. Seuss poem, The Grinch. As you can see, there's some Grinch stuff happening around here this Christmas. But the whole idea, the whole concept for this particular series is to tackle some of the feelings and emotions that we experience around the Christmas season. And so over the past few weeks, we've talked about a couple of these. We started with talking about the feeling of betrayal. Last week, Tracy talked to us about the feeling of loneliness. And today, we are going to talk about feeling conflicted. And so hopefully, you're ready to talk a little bit about conflict this morning. Is that me up here as I move? Wow, I don't know if I have a short cable or something. We'll see how that goes. So to all of our guests, if you are here today and you want to follow along, I don't know, but I'm not it. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. If you do not have our app and you want to follow along with us today, you can grab a picture of the QR code on the screens behind me, and it will take you directly to our live event in YouVersion where you can follow along with our scriptures. There's some notes there. I'm going to strongly encourage all of you to do that today. I don't typically say I think everybody should do this, but today I'm actually going to encourage you to do this because there is a lot of scripture to support what I'm going to talk about. There's a section in each of the four Gospels, and it's pretty lengthy, and so I'm not going to be reading it. I'm going to be summarizing and paraphrasing, but inside of YouVersion, every passage that I'm not trying to leave you out today, but I'm not going to be actually reading the text. So what I am going to do, though, in a little while here is put some... This particular sermon, Tracy gave me the good ones. He gave me betrayal and conflict, and he took alone. I became quickly overwhelmed by how many different directions I could go with this particular topic, feeling conflicted. Because let's be real, for conflict than other times of the year. Now, it would seem to be opposite of that, right? Because Christmas is when everybody's in a good mood and they're celebrating the joy of the Christmas season. Yeah. And then you go out and you try to go shopping somewhere and you realize how there's just not much joy, but there's a whole lot of conflict, right? I got to be honest with you, I really struggled with which direction I was supposed to go. And really, to be honest with you, I was really feeling kind of conflicted, right? Because there's just so much that we could talk about, so many different ways I could. I'm pretty sure most of you, to speak on a regular basis, you probably haven't experienced this exact type of internal conflict, but I think you all get what I'm talking about when I use the term internal conflict, right? Internal conflict, in other words, conflict that exists inside of you. Not with you and another person, but just conflict internally. And we all deal in different types and in different ways with internal conflict. And what I want to do is pause for just a second because I want to point something out about conflict. Conflict is a word that has pretty negative connotations. Would you all agree? Right? Most of you don't think of the word conflict and think of it in positive terms, right? But there might have been another one, but now there's like 40. I don't know. But conflict, one definition of conflict is this: it's a serious disagreement or argument, typically a protracted one, right? With these definitions of conflict right now. And then the last one is a condition in which a person experiences a clash of opposing wishes or needs. Now, for me, as I prepared this particular sermon, I was identifying pretty much with the last definition that we just gave there, right? I have a number of choices, a number of internal, personal conflict. And the nice thing about this particular conflict is that all my options are pretty good, okay? All my options are pretty good. Now, how many of you have had situations where you have personal conflict and all your options are good? Okay? So let's say, I don't know, none of you probably play the lottery, but let's say that you did and you won the lottery and you had 20 people that you love and care about that you could give some money to, okay? That's a conflict where every option is good, right? Everything that you do is going to have a good outcome. And that's still a conflict though, right? You still feel conflicted even though all of your options are good ones. How nice would it be if all of the conflict we experienced was that type of internal conflict, where all my options are good options? It's still conflict, it's still uncomfortable, but man, it's so much better than some of the other options that we deal with. Now, there are lots of ways that this plays out in everyday life. All of you can relate in some way, shape, or form to what I am talking about today. One of the things that has recently been an issue for me, in recent weeks especially, is that we have a family in our church, Holly Sumrall. You guys have seen her name come up in our weekly update. Holly's a young woman who is battling late-stage uterine cancer. And her situation, it just isn't good, right? It's not good. And I've known this child since she was in youth. She and her twin sister were in my youth group. I've known their family for a long time. They're experiencing some of the most difficult set of circumstances a family could ever endure. Holly and Amber's dad died when they were very young. He died from complications from, I want to say it was a tonsillectomy. It was some minor surgery. And he had complications and he died unexpectedly. And so these girls have spent their whole life growing up without a dad. And they've lost so many members of their family. Illnesses, drug overdoses, things that are just not, folks, just not like good things to experience. And this is one family. And Holly has one aunt who really is a primary caretaker for her. She's been on a waiting list for a kidney transplant for almost a year. She just got a call on Thursday that a kidney came in for her. So she was sent to UC to have a kidney transplant. And so now it's Amber and her mom trying to deal and take care of Holly, who's having this late-stage battle with cancer. And I personally want to be there for them as much as I possibly can. But here's the thing, folks. I am conflicted because I have so many things that are happening here, right here at Five Rivers Church, that I need and want to do. I have a family. It's the holidays. I've got a lot of stuff there going on, and I'm recovering from my second surgery in 5 months. I'm with Holly and her family, or my family, or things here at Five Rivers, or I went home and rested my body. It's all good, but you can relate, yes? So sometimes internal conflict, all of our options are good. Sometimes, though, internal conflict, that is just not the case. Okay, guys, I just got a slide change error, so I've lost my connection. So I'm going to have to try and find where I'm at in my notes, and then you guys are going to have to manage my slides for me, okay? Let me see if I can find where we are. Okay, so we all experience these things, sometimes good choices, but sometimes we have choices where there's a good outcome and there's going to be a negative outcome. You all with me? Right? So sometimes you experience these conflicts where it's like, well, I've got a choice that's going to come for good, and I got a choice that'll come for not so good. And you all know something is going to win out. The question is, what will it win out? We all have these moments where we know what we should do, and we know what we want to do. This weekend, Dawn and I decided to take our son to Young's Jersey Dairy. Y'all know where Young's is? Yep. Y'all been to Young's before? Yep. So we go to Young's, and I'm standing there looking at the menu, and I'm like, I just had my gallbladder removed. And so I'm not going to get the big, giant, double bacon cheeseburger. I got a turkey bacon something club instead. Go, Brian. I did not give in to the bad conflict until shake with a dip of ice cream literally floating in it. And of course, that's the one I got, right? Even though Dawn's staying there telling me, Brian, you do not need that. You know what? You're right. I do not need that. But I want that, and that's what I'm getting. And so that is what I got. So 1 for 1. I went 1 for 1 on knowing what I should do and knowing what I wanted to do. Now, I'm not trying to make fun of or poke fun at conflict. I know some of you are like, Brian, that's such a dumb example. I give you that example because I want it to be relatable to you. Because there's something true that we all need to own about conflict. And that is this. You would say this, that when you're experiencing a lot of internal conflict, you also come with that a lot of external conflict. So when you're conflicted internally about things, does it frustrate you? Does it irritate you? Does it put you on edge? And then do you often find yourself then more often in external conflict with other people? I know the thought is, what's going on with them? Right, y'all? Y'all know what I'm talking about? What's going on with you? There's obviously some kind of conflict going on in you. And so what we tend to do is when we experience internal conflict, we take it out on the people around us, and it manifests itself as external conflict. What I want to do this morning is I want to spend just a few minutes talking about an example in Scripture where we find some people who are internally conflicted, and it manifests itself externally and creates issues. And so this is the point at which I'm going to ask all of you to look in your sermon notes and find those passages. Please don't read them right now, but make sure you've seen them and that you can go back and read all of them. All four Gospels, it's basically Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper with his disciples. And there's some things that happen here that I want to talk about. So Jesus, there are all the references. Those of you who are using your paper Bibles, you're going to want to make sure you write those down and take them home with you and read them later. Because what we find in these passages is some conflict between the disciples and even the disciples with Jesus. So it's during his last meal with them. Jesus does some really cool things. He gives them a new promise. He institutes the Lord's Supper. But then he does a couple of other things that create some issues for the 12. One thing he does is he says, one of you guys is going to betray me. And then he says, and if that's not enough, one of you is also going to deny me. Now, I want you to imagine you're sitting in this upper room with Jesus. Things are weird. Jesus is saying a whole bunch of weird stuff. He's talked about how he's going to die, and you don't want to hear any of that. And there's all this, and then he takes you up, and he does this Lord's Supper thing. And then he says, and by the way, one of you guys is going to betray me. Now, I want you to imagine you're one of those 12, and you're sitting there, and you're looking around at each other going, wonder who that's going to be. And then you start doing things like this. You start going back and you go back like 3 months, 6 months, and you start thinking about, could this be me? You start thinking about everything that you've said and everything that you've done and every interaction you've had, and you start doubting. And you start having this moment of internal conflict. And every one of these disciples, I can almost guarantee you, is sitting there wondering, is it going to be me? And then they start thinking, well, wait a minute. What if they think it's going to be me? What? You know, you start thinking about all the times you've disagreed with one of the other guys, and he's looking at you like, yeah, I'll bet it's going to be him. I'll bet he's the one who's going to betray Jesus. I always knew he was a loser. You all follow what I'm saying here, right? And so maybe, just maybe, they're having this really intense internal conflict. And you know what happens in this moment? The disciples start bickering among themselves. You know what they start arguing about? Who is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God? Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? Now, I can't help but think that internally they're all conflicted and they start bickering with each other about, well, I'm going to make sure you know it's not going to be me. So I'm going to talk about why I should be the greatest in the kingdom. And they have this argument about who is going to be greater. How fitting that this conversation happens in a moment where no doubt the disciples are experiencing an intense amount of internal conflict. But that's not really the point I want you to take home today. The encounter I really want you to get is the one between Peter and Jesus. Because in this same exchange, Jesus bows down and begins washing his disciples' feet. You probably are familiar with the story. Jesus comes to Peter, and Peter's like, whoa, stop. You are not washing my feet, dude. It's not going to happen, right? I should be washing your feet. You are not going to be knelt down in front of me like a slave would and wash my feet. It's not going to happen. And Jesus says something. He goes, Peter, listen, if I don't wash your feet, if I don't do this, you can't have any part of me. If I don't wash you, you can't be part of me. And so Peter thinking like, hey, Jesus is getting ready to wash me, like from top to bottom, like cleanse me, like this is my initiation into the club. Jesus, just wash me all over. Head, hands, feet, just wash it all. I have no doubt that Peter looks at this and thinks, oh, so this isn't like a slave would wash my feet. This is Jesus washing me so I can be initiated in the kingdom. And he's all about it. And some of you might think, but he doesn't really say that. But if you listen to what Jesus says in response, Jesus comes back, he says, no, Peter, I don't need to wash you to consecrate you. And you, again, I'm paraphrasing, go back and read this. He says, you're already consecrated, you're already in kingdom, but your feet are still dirty. And your feet still need to be cleaned. And so I am going to kneel down and I'm going to wash your feet. You see, I believe that Peter is experiencing this moment of conflict. I have no doubt that Peter's questioning himself. Am I going to be the one to betray Jesus? Am I going to be one of these losers who's going to do one of these things? And so he's like, I can't exist this way with Jesus. And that manifests itself externally in this argument with Jesus. Peter's known for this, right? You guys go back and read about Peter. This is kind of Peter's personality. He's a little bit of a hothead. But Peter and Jesus have this moment of conflict. And I believe wholeheartedly that conflict comes from a place where Peter doesn't get what Jesus is really trying to say. He's not even getting what Jesus is really trying to do. See, what Jesus is trying to do, and you'll get this if you go back and read these passages, Jesus is trying to teach the disciples something about humility. He's trying to teach them about humility. Jesus knows that this humility thing is so incredibly important, and Jesus needs to make sure he gets it. And so it's one of the final things that he does in his time with them. And I want you all to hear me when I say this today. Most of what I'm going to talk about in the remaining time I have left is external conflict. External conflict that is often the result of internal conflict. And as it relates to most conflicts that you're going to engage with around the holidays, let me be clear here. There's a lot of conflict in the world today, right? You look around, it seems like every time you turn the news on, there's a conflict somewhere else in the world. I'm not talking about fixing those conflicts. Okay, that's a whole nother sermon, but we're not talking about today. So when I make the comments that I'm going to make moving forward, I don't want you to think that I'm trying to give some simplified solution to all the world's conflicts. I'm talking about the conflicts that you are likely to encounter in your family, your close circles of friends, coworkers, whatever, as you move throughout the remainder of the holiday season. Because here's what's to conflict. Humility is the secret sauce. All right? Humility is the secret sauce to much of our conflict. You can put that in the context of marriage. You can put that in the context of parent-child relationship. You can put that in the context of coworkers, extended family. You can put in family and friends around the holidays. What's at its core? I'm going to guess it's not humility. I'm going to guess that the reason you're in conflict is because you're both being too humble. I know you're laughing like, yeah. Because that's hardly ever the case, right? I mean, let's be real about it. And here's what's true, too. The holidays are hard because most of you have that one person or that one family when you get to your family holidays that you spend most of the year avoiding. And some of you are like, I can't believe you're saying that out loud in church. But here's the thing, folks, it's real. It's true. Like, I'm not saying all of you, but most of you have got a person. I want you right now to think of that person. I want you to get them right here in your head. That person you spend the whole year avoiding, and then Christmas time comes, and you're like, well, I guess I have to. And this makes it so much harder, right? Because, it's Christmas time. I want to be happy, and I want to have the joy of the season. I got to deal with you. Now, what inevitably happens when we spend time with people at Christmas? You spend enough time with people, eventually you have to exchange some words, right? You have to have conversation about what you can and can't talk about at family gatherings, right? We'll call them off-limit conversation topics, okay? And I know, based on my experiences with working with a lot of families over the last 25 years, that politics and religion are usually way up near the top of that list. Yeah? Oh, yeah. And here's what I think. Now, this is me speaking. There's no biblical precedent. There's no biblical verse that'll say this, okay? But I believe, okay, that one of the reasons that we can't have meaningful conversation and dialogue about these two things in particular is because many of us are internally conflicted about them. And that internal conflict we deal with manifests itself externally. We live in a culture where many, many Americans are obsessed, overcome with an abject fear of the other side of the political argument. And I'm talking about an abject fear. we are told over and over and over by really loud voices, if that other group gets in control, you can kiss this country goodbye. Just kiss it goodbye because it's over. And no matter which side of the spectrum, the end of the spectrum you're on, you might have an abject fear of the other side. You fear that if they get in control, well, it's all over. And I'm here to tell you something, folks, that's an internal conflict that you're struggling with. That's an internal conflict. That's a fear that you have of what might happen if the other team gets the ball. And see, this is something I think that goes on for a lot of us. Many of us, and I've talked to a number of people, and not only do we have really closely held love and admiration for our own opinions and ideologies, but we have an equally strong disdain and hatred for the other. Not only do we love what we think, but we really hate what other people think. And then when we encounter someone who personifies the very thing that we hate the most, we short circuit and we don't even know what to do. And that oftentimes leads us to allowing an internal conflict to manifest itself externally. And without even realizing we're doing it, we begin working every angle that we possibly can to persuade or convince our opponent to join our side, to win them over. And if we can't win them over, well, let's just make them look like the complete idiots that they are. And in most cases, humility is nowhere to be found. Because there's no place for humility in war, right? There's no place for humility in war. And I think too many of us feel like we're at war with the other side. And that external conflict comes from an internal conflict that we feel. And so because I'm at war and I have to win at all costs, there's no place for humility. And I think that's one of the reasons, a big reason, why politics in particular is an off-limit conversation. Let's move on, though, because what about religion, folks? What about religion? How many of you love it when some family member starts talking about religion at a family holiday? Especially when they don't agree with you. You're like sitting there and you're like, please don't bring it up, please don't bring it up, please don't bring it up, please don't bring it up. See, here's the thing for me, folks. This is hard for me to talk about, but there was a time in my life when I was that guy. Yep, when I was young, when I first became like a pastor, I knew I was right and pretty much everyone else was wrong. Okay? Man, I knew what I believed, I knew it was right, and I felt like it was my responsibility to stand up for what was right and make everybody else abide by it. And then I needed to denounce everything that you said and did that was wrong. But that was my responsibility to you as a believer. And so you better believe every chance I got, I did just that. And if you disagreed with me on something, well, let's go. Let's tangle. Get your Bible out. Let's rumble. Come on, let's do it. That was me. There was such folks, here's the reality. There was such an internal conflict in me because I wanted people in my family, my circle of friends to experience what I experienced. I wanted them to have what I had. I wanted them to understand the way I understood. And for some reason, I made it my responsibility to make that happen for them. But at the same time, I also wanted God to know how much I loved him. And part of me showing God how much I loved him was making sure everybody else knew, like putting people in the right place and letting them know when they were wrong, almost as if God had called me to be him to them in their life and convict them of all the things that they were doing that were wrong. And I believe so strongly in this that I was willing to sacrifice relationships with people to be right. And that's conflict, folks. It's an internal conflict in me that I had a really hard time working through. But at some point in my life, it all changed for me because at some point in my life, I understood that Jesus was calling me to be humble. Jesus was calling me to exhibit humility. And eventually, I began to come to a place where I understood that it's more important for me to win in relationships than to win in arguments. I had to learn that I can express my beliefs and my opinions in a loving way, and I can trust God to do the rest in a way that only he can, as he works in the hearts of the people that I love and care about. And even those people that are hard for me to love and care about. Those people that I spend the whole year avoiding and have to spend time with at Christmas. And so today, I continue to learn about humility. And one thing that I've discovered in my own life, and I don't know if this will be true for you, but I know it's been true for me, the more I've understood humility, I have abundantly more opportunities to talk about my faith and my beliefs and my ideas than I ever had before. And I get the opportunity to express them in settings where they're centered around meaningful, actual conversation and not arguments. Over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I and Dawn, we have both had many, many difficult conversations with our kids. Any of you who are parents of teenagers or young adults, man, you know what I'm talking about, right? And there have been some things that they have said to me and some things that they have expressed that have made me really fear for them. Things that they've said, things that they think and that they believe. And there have been moments, folks, where in my heart I wanted nothing more than to go toe-to-toe with them, bash them over the head with what I know to be true about my own faith, and win that battle with them. And there are probably times, I'm sure they're both here, they could probably both tell you, yes, Dad, there are times when you seem to have done that. But more of the time, Dawn and I haven't done that. We've learned not to do that. We had to trust God to do what only God can do. And because God has been teaching me that I don't have to win every battle for what they think and believe, I have come to understand that He alone can do things I can never do. He's a much better persuader than I am, because He can reach them in a place that I never can. And in recent months, we've had conversations with both of our children. Esther, in particular, recently has been having some really amazing conversations with Dawn and I, talking about how God has been working in her and changing her from the inside out, showing her things, revealing Himself in ways. And I got to be honest with you, there are these moments where I get really frustrated because I'm like, girl, I've been telling you that for a long time. But in all seriousness, I know deep in my heart that I would not be having those conversations with Esther today if I had chosen to win the arguments and the battles over the relationship with her. Trust God that He will do in her what He alone can do. And while I don't get it right every time, and while there's still conflict in our home at times, right? Okay? I'm learning a whole lot of things about humility and how humility can help dissipate conflict. And here's another truth, folks. We cannot live relational existence. We cannot live in relationship with other people and just simply avoid all conflict. Because conflict happens because we're broken people. We have strong opinions and feelings, and we don't always agree, right? And to go back to our definitions of conflict, this stuff just happens. But I want you to understand, humility, I'm going to say it again, humility is the secret sauce to dissipating much of the external conflicts that we experience as we engage other people. I'm not advocating to any of you that you just roll over and let every single person walk all over you all the time. But I am going to say this. You go back and look at Jesus' life and you see how many times Jesus let other people make fun of Him, talk negatively about Him. When He stood before Pilate, you look at the number of times Jesus exhibited humility. He tried to help His disciples understand, what I need you to do is understand being humble, putting yourself in a place of servanthood to those around you. And I'm going to encourage you, listen, you got a couple of weeks before Christmas. Well, not quite a couple of weeks. You got a little bit of time before Christmas comes. And I want to give you a chance to try some of this. I want to encourage you to do a couple of things. When you're sitting around the table and there's somebody there that's grating on your nerves and you want nothing more than tell them to shut up or throw them in there, whatever it is you want to do, try and do something different. Try to listen for a moment to see if you can understand a little bit about where they might be coming from. Ask them some questions. Not so you can make them look ridiculous, but so that you can maybe I kind of want to understand you a little bit more. I vehemently disagree with you internally, but I'm just going to ask you some questions because I really just want to know. And you know how you have that one person who's a know-it-all at your family gathering, and they're going on and on and on, mansplaining absolutely everything, right? And you want nothing more than just tell them to shut up or whatever. Just try one time. Don't try to correct everybody. If somebody says something wrong, let them be wrong. Is the world going to end because they're wrong about something, folks? Is it? No. Like the world is not going to end because they got a date wrong or they got some detail wrong about something that happened in the news. Who cares? But some of us, man, we need to be right all the time. We have to prove how intelligent and smart we are. Because we got this internal conflict. We got this conflict going on, and we can't have other people seeing us the way we see ourselves. So, y'all follow where I'm going here. I'm encouraging you this holiday season to try something different. Be humble, right? Be humble. It doesn't matter if you win the argument. What matters is, can you win the relationship? Can you win the relationship? I wonder to myself, this is one of the questions that I wrestled with as I wrapped up my sermon preparation for this sermon. What would happen if more of us would attempt to do things like this? What might the world look like? What might our families look like if more of us would operate the way Jesus did? Because what Jesus did when the disciples started arguing about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom, how many of you read the part where he told them they were being infantile morons and to just shut up about it? Did any of you read that section? When you go back, you're not going to find it there. You know what Jesus does? He takes off his robe and he bows down in front of them and he washes their feet. Jesus exercises the most crazy form of humility to dissipate an argument over who's going to be the greatest in his kingdom. And I wonder how much more our conversations, our relationships, how much would they change if we would operate this way? And I'm not telling you the next time you're at a family gathering and there's an argument, take your person's shoes off and get a bowl of water and start washing their feet, okay? That probably will not go over super well, okay? But internally, make yourself humble, folks. You humble yourself. Humble yourself. Try something new. How much might the kingdom grow if people who call themselves followers of Jesus could learn to exercise a little bit more humility so that we can better dissipate a lot of the external conflict that goes on around us. I'm going to ask Mary Beth to come up on the stage because we're going to close today with a song. And the song is called I Give Myself Away. And here's what I want you all to do. I want you to just think about the words of this song, and I want you to let them kind of like permeate your spirit a little bit as you think about humility and what it might mean to give yourself away. First and foremost to God, and then to the people who you encounter throughout the holidays and into the new year. And what does it mean? What does it look like for you to be humble, to dissipate some of the conflict that we experience? I'm going to make my way back to the keyboard, and we're going to sing this song together.